Hi, this is Tucker, and this is your first vocabulary list from our upcoming book, Omnivore's Dilemma. So you're going to want to take notes on the word, part of speech, and definition, and then any example that I think of or that you think of that will help you to remember these words, please write at least one example down. So the first word is immerse, and it's a verb, and it means to involve deeply, to surround yourself with something completely. It can mean to absorb, to be totally absorbed in something. So if you are immersed in a good book, that means you are so into that book that even if somebody walked up to you and said your name, you might not hear them because you're so tuned in, you're so surrounded by the book and what's happening in the book. So oftentimes, little kids, like I have a daughter, she's reading Harry Potter right now, and if I go into her room and I say her name, she doesn't even move. It's like she can't hear me. She's totally immersed in the book, totally involved and surrounded by what's happening in it. The next word is forage. Forage is a verb, and it means to wander or go in search of provisions. Think of provisions as food. So before we had things like supermarkets and big farms, a lot of people would forage, right? They'd go around the woods and they'd grab berries, or they would find, different kinds of vegetables and plants they could eat, or they might have found nuts. So they were foraging for their food, going in search of food. And so some people still forage for things like mushrooms, which grow in the wild, or they forage for berries, which means they're going out, they're wandering, they're searching and trying to find these provisions, these food items. The next word is alchemy. And alchemy is an interesting word because it has kind of a long background. But when you think of it, think about kind of an ancient chemical science. And the objective of this ancient chemical science was to try to turn something of no value into something of value. So in this very kind of convoluted, complex definition, it says a medieval chemical science and speculative philosophy aiming to achieve the transmutation of the base metals into gold. So it was like it started out as trying to use chemistry, really, or chemical reactions to change something like a very base metal, just an average everyday metal, into something much more valuable. And when you hear alchemy used now, it's really anytime you're changing one thing kind of into something else of value. So the definition has become more broad, and you'll hear it used throughout the book. So think of it as kind of a change that the connection to chemistry might help you, but anytime you're trying to change one thing to another. Conscious describes someone who is fully aware of something or sensitive to something. So if you're conscious of something, you're aware of it, you're sensitive to it. It is on your radar. So a good example of being conscious of something is when you're out and about in the world, you're very conscious of particular dangers that exist. So when you're crossing a street, most people are very conscious that there's cars going fast, so they pause, they look both ways because they are very aware that there is a danger when you cross the street. The next word is karmic, and many people may have heard of karma. Obviously they come from the same root word, but karmic is a noun, and it's an action seen as bringing upon oneself inevitable results. So when you do something, something else happens. Whether it's good or bad, it kind of depends on what you did initially. And so a lot of people say that it's karma when you do something bad and then something bad happens to you. And karmic is the action seen as bringing on something good or bad. And so if you think about it in that sense, this picture of the bullfighter, the matador, who's actually being impaled, or the bull is hitting him with his horns, a lot of people would say, well, that's what he gets for going out and being a bullfighter and killing bulls himself. That sometimes it might actually happen where he gets injured by the bull. The next word is ingenuity. It's a noun, And it's the quality of being really clever in your ability to kind of invent things, or if you're really clever and resourceful. So a lot of people, you run into these little challenges every day that we face, and some people are able to create little devices to kind of do things that they weren't able to do otherwise. So for example, look, you think about things we use every day, like a straw when you're drinking out of a bottle or a can. Like somebody thought of that. Somebody was very clever and had the ingenuity to think, wow, I don't want to have to pick up my can. I just want to be able to drink out of, a straw. Or, so they created this object so they didn't have to lean down and drink from a can or put their lips on a glass bottle. So that might be an example. I drive a Nissan Leaf, and it's a solar. It's obviously it's an electric car, so I have solar panels. And so it was somebody who had a lot of ingenuity, a company put together this concept of having a car that runs on electricity that could hopefully be fueled by electricity from solar power, but definitely a clever, very resourceful concept to think about designing automobiles that don't rely on fossil fuels like gas, which are limited. Folly. Folly is a noun and is the state or quality of being foolish. So folly, foolish. So somebody who has the quality of being foolish has folly, right? So it's this lack of understanding, it's a lack of sense. So think folly and foolishness, keep them connected in your mind. And there's actually a whole genre or a whole category of what's called folly folly architecture, where these buildings are built and they're just kind of foolish in their design because the design is meant to be kind of fun and playful and doesn't really serve an architectural purpose. And so I found this picture of this building that literally the top of it is in the shape of a pineapple. And this is definitely underneath the umbrella of folly architecture. Next word is confinement, and this is a noun, and it's the state of being confined or shut up or kept in, prevented from leaving a particular place. And there's a lot of reasons why people might be put into confinement. Way in the past, women who were pregnant in their last 3 months when their bellies were really big and they were showing, were often kept in confinement because it was seen as kind of indecent to have these really pregnant women out and about. Sometimes people are kept in confinement because of an illness, or maybe they're being imprisoned and they're being kept in confinement away from other people. So there's lots of reasons why this happens. And in the context of Omnivore's dilemma, you're going to hear about animals, huge numbers of animals being kept in confinement, away from the outdoors, in huge kind of gated areas to keep them from going outside and getting some illness and bringing it back and infecting lots of other animals. So these pigs are obviously being kept in confinement. The next word is unprecedented. It's an adjective, and it means without previous instance. So it hasn't happened before. It hasn't been experienced before. Maybe there's no other examples people can think of that are quite like what's just happened. So the event itself feels totally new and unparalleled. And for a lot of people, 9/11 was very much this unprecedented event. Nobody could remember, an attack on the United States to this scale. So it was unprecedented. The next word is fauna, and it's a noun. And the fauna are the animals of a particular place or a given region. So if you go to a particular country, then there's often, different areas in that country will have different types of animals that are kind of native to that country. And obviously, you depending on the temperature, you'll have different kinds of animals that are prone to living in a particular place. And often you'll hear this word it says flora and fauna. So you'll talk about the flora, the flowers and the vegetation of a place, as well as the fauna, the animals that are also living, that tend to live in that place. So here's an example of a frog that lives in Ecuador. It's perfectly adapted for living in this particular region. The next word is opaque. And opaque, the primary definition is that something that's opaque doesn't let light in. It's so dark that no light gets through. But the secondary definition is something that is opaque is hard to understand. It's not clear, it's not lucid, and so opaque can mean no light gets through. But if you think about it in the context of your mind, if you can't figure something out, it's almost like the light, the understanding can't get through. So I had to choose a picture that was more connected to the primary definition. Obviously, this car has really dark tinting. It's opaque. It's almost impossible to kind of see inside. And so that might help you remember that something opaque is dark, hard to see through, and secondary, hard to understand. Ignorance is a noun, and it's the state or fact of being ignorant or not knowing something. So oftentimes people are ignorant of things because they haven't learned about them. They don't know anything about them. To be really honest, there's a ton of topics I am totally ignorant about. I'm ignorant about, topics related to advanced biology. I know very little about advanced biology, or I'm ignorant about, how different parts of the brain work. It's just not an area of expertise for me. So oftentimes ignorance is kind of connected with not having education in a particular area, and just not knowing anything about it because you haven't been taught. Fleeting is an adjective, and it means passing swiftly. And if you think about like a fleet of cars, maybe that will help some people remember that this means going fast, but it's something that passes quickly, vanishes quickly. So you'll hear people talk about things like, youth, being young, it's fleeting. It goes by so quickly. Or beauty, that when we're young, we're beautiful, but it's fleeting. It doesn't last forever. If we're lucky enough to get old, then our looks are gonna fade. And so it's that idea of anything that is just, it's there for a short period of time. And yes, youth, it feels like you're young for so long when you're in it, but when you get older and you look back, you realize how short your time as a child or a young person really was. Stake is a noun, and a stake can be an actual like wooden object that you put in the ground when you're marking off territory. But a secondary definition, when you have a stake in something, it means you have a monetary, like money, or commercial interest, investment, share, or involvement in something. So if you have a stake in something, you might have invested money and into whatever it is, and then you really want to see that thing that you've invested in do well because you would financially gain from that experience. So if I have a stake in a local company, I might have given that company money to get started, and then I really want to see that company do well, because if they do well, they're going to pay me back my money and then some. So a stake is to have an investment, a share, an involvement in something because you hope you're going to gain something from that. So a lot of people feel like a stake in companies that they invest in on the stock market. And so they give their money to these companies, and then they hope the company will do well, the stock prices will go up, and they'll make more money from that investment. And our last word is agriculture. This is a noun, and it's the science, the art, the occupation of either cultivating the land because you're growing vegetables or food, raising crops, feeding, breeding, or raising livestock, that's farm animals. So when you think of agriculture, think growing food, think raising animals, think of farming in general. So agriculture really is the art, the science, the occupation of farming. So thinking about farming when you think about agriculture.